Uh-oh. What? Who are you? Wow. The fox jumped towards the swamp. I have to go after it. There it is again. It jumped further into the swamp. It almost looked like it was waiting for me. I'm going after it. Huh? Where did the fox go?
We all wish the young tree walker lots of luck. But now, on with the program.
Set up in honor of the foxes, or to annoy chickens. Another fox statue. Was that here before?
Be sure to join us early tomorrow for morning calisthenics.
You caught me! Alas, now I have to go home.
The fox jumped into a portal. I can't let it get away again.
Folks, you won't believe what I just saw.
So, you finally returned to us, Kitsune. I hope you'll stay a little longer with us this time.
Oh, the fox skipped off. Again. So, its name is Kitsune. But who just talked to the fox? So where am I now? It is very quiet here, as if there are no people anywhere near. Only more of these fox statues. But I can hear a very soft ringing, or chiming. Over there, in the bushes, I see something sparkling. It almost looks like an entire city back there, but I can't see any people. Another one of those posters, but it looks a little different, and I can't read the writing, but I guess it says, The Great Zaroff. Set up in honor of the foxes, or to annoy chickens. I can see a little golden bell hanging there. I wonder if the fox from Mousewood lost it. Cute. Earlier it sounded like it was talking. Hello? Anybody there? No reply. What a strange statue. Is that supposed to be a fox as well? Cool. That is some army of fox statues. Scary. Ho ho! That is pretty loud. Nothing's happening. Maybe it's because it's made from wood, not stone. Hello? Anybody there? No reply.
Who disturbs my slumber? I cannot see you, but I sense your presence. Your path has led you to this point, but no further. I am the keeper of this gate. I am the guardian of this place. A blind fox could smell you from miles away. And so can I. How did you arrive in this place? That we foxes wrested away from the humans. Human. Since I did not allow you to enter through this gate, you must have gained access through the tree node.
Yes, the portal.
Kitsune. Her dealings with humans have rendered her almost as blind as I.
Is that a reason to not let me through?
This gate will remain closed to humans. Kitsune, is that you? The bright chime of your little bell cannot be mistaken. Your smell gives you away, human. You really thought you could deceive this old, blind fox?
Oh, well,
A human? Deceiving a fox? No, this is precious.
Actually, I'm trying to return this bell to the fox.
Ah, returning her lost property. What a noble gesture. You may pass, but be careful, human. Never trust a fox, especially not one like her.
I find it surprising that you should be kind enough to bid me farewell. Thank you, my beloved.
It was bound to end sooner or later.
Yes, it is the end of warbling birds and green pastures. Instead, it is the beginning of murky waters and empty notebooks.
I have to go.
I know.
Not a trace of the fox. Maybe that lady can tell me where it went. Hey, the fox is right here, but where did the lady go? Ha! At last! Gotcha! Whoa!
Oh, boy! Stop following me around, Jerry! Don't you know what it means when someone is running away from you?
I am so sorry. Do you want me to leave?
No, please. I don't want to be alone.
What happened?
I wish I could tell you, but you would hate me. And there is already more than one human who hates me.
You should never use the word hate. It will ruin your teeth. That's what my mum always, I once read that in a magazine.
Well, how would you feel if someone had broken your heart? Wouldn't you hate them?
I don't know. My heart's never been broken yet.
If you stay with me long enough, I'll break it for you if you want me to.
I think I once saw someone's heart being broken. Didn't look very amusing.
No, humans are so fragile. Not in the least like foxes. We try to make you happy, but it never works out.
This statue once said I should never trust a fox.
But he's a fox as well. At least, that's what he was before. A few hundred years ago, he sold his 9 tails to a demon. So why should you trust him?
What happened?
I wish I could tell you, but you would hate me. And there is already more than one human who hates me.
Did you also set a classmate's lunchbox on fire? That happened to me. It would have been a great magic trick if it had worked. But let me tell you, they really hated me after that.
Well, how would you feel if someone had broken your heart? Wouldn't you hate them?
I don't know. My heart's never been broken yet.
If you stay with me long enough, I'll break it for you if you want me to.
I think I once saw someone's heart being broken. Didn't look very amusing.
No, humans are so fragile. Not in the least like foxes. We try to make you happy, but it never works out.
This statue once said I should never trust a fox.
But he's a fox as well. At least, that's what he was before. A few hundred years ago, he sold his 9 tails to a demon. So why should you trust him?
So, you, know my name?
Oh, I've been watching you for a while. Over in the other world where we met.
Really?
I'm sorry. I should have introduced myself. I'm Kitsuna.
My name is Jeremiah Hazelnut, but my friends call me Jerry.
Jerry. Oh.
I think you lost something.
Oh, please keep it. I would like it if you took it with you, so you'll remember me.
Okay. Where did we meet?
I've been watching you for a while. Over in the other world where we met. I'm Kitsuna.
This is probably a silly question, but what are you? Fox or human?
I'm a fox, but I can change how you perceive me any way I want to.
Really? That's the coolest magic trick I've ever heard of.
You think so? It's not difficult. Just give it a try. Anyone can do it if they know how it's done.
Even me. I'm going to be a great magician, you know.
Oh,
So, you can teach me how to do it?
no. I promised on my parents' honor that I wouldn't teach it to anyone. The foxes here only use it to make people unhappy. But not me. I want them to be happy. But it never works out that way.
But I'm a human, not a fox.
I'm sorry, Jerry. I really can't do it. Unless, do you really want to make people happy? When you succeed in making a sad person happy, then I might believe you.
I once told my cousin a really funny joke. He laughed so hard that milk came out of his nose.
No! Laughter is not enough. Have you ever made someone so happy that it inspired them to do something truly outstanding?
No, not really.
Then come back when you have. I know you can do it.
Can you teach me the spell now?
Have you ever made someone so happy that it inspired them to do something truly outstanding?
No, not really.
Then come back when you have. I know you can do it.
I'll come back soon. I promise.
See you soon.
Bamboo! As far as the eye can see. Those would make great pogo sticks. No, really. Why would the poet keep staring at the pond? I don't get it. There's nothing in there.
The quiet pond. No, that doesn't cut it. Gloomy pond. Ah!
Excuse me, are you a poet?
Am I a poet? A poet needs inspiration. And she no longer wishes to be mine. Instead, she just broke my heart. My name will fade into oblivion, just like my words and the ink on my paper.
What are you doing here?
Dark water is all I can see. Dark, dark water.
Where did that, inspiring thing go to?
This wretched creature, she used me. A true fox. I was a fool to believe that she and I were in any way alike. Foxes' hearts are broken and filled with pain. The pain transforms into cunning. And the cunning of a fox will break any man's heart.
Are you looking for a new inspiration or something?
I need inspiration. But my spirit remains empty and unmoving. Just like this pond, nothing is stirring. And the same is true for my imagination.
What about the rock over there? Isn't it, exciting?
Your words are just as empty as mine.
Don't tell me I didn't try.
Is that a frog I hear? A frog. Aha! No, my inspiration is dwindling again. Is that a frog I hear? A frog. Aha! No, my inspiration is dwindling again. Wait a moment. Yes, I've got it. See the ancient pond. The green frog takes heart and leaps. Sound of the water. Oh, it's perfect. Basho, you old fool, you've still got it. The leap of the frog, the parting water. By giving it room, the light overcoming the heavy. And thus my heart as well.
I saw what you did for the poet. His poems are truly beautiful, but they arise from his pain. In darkest night that's black and cold, that's where the stars shine brightest. Did you know that, Jerry? That is why I had to break his heart. It always happens that way. But you know what it takes to make others happy. And now I'm going to help you. Look closely, Jerry.
I understand, but how can I do it? All right.
Come on, let's go back to Mousewood. Believe me, this world isn't for you. The other foxes here aren't as nice as me. Also, I want to find out whether someone tried to eat Uli's special treats, and whether Plato finally worked up the courage to speak to Anya.
Wow, how do you know all these things?
You'd be surprised about how much you notice when you change into a statue.
So it was you watching me. I knew there was something strange about those statues.
Yep.
What's the matter with her?
Do you know where we are?
Who are you? Ah,
What did you see? Do you understand it yet?
no.
I wrote a story for you. It might help you understand. Do not be afraid, but be on your guard.
You want me to read that story? What does all this mean?
That's what I'm trying to find out, Jerry.
The Marquis! Where are you?
Still in the magician's house. You learned the fox's spell? You did very well. Foxes are a bit of a tricky bunch, but they're also quite fascinating. Don't you think so?
Yes, but what do I do next?
There is a cold tree in the northwest. To find it, you must seek out the treetops. Travelers who are able to walk between worlds are said to have settled there. The tree will lead you to the eternal ice, and that is where you will find your next spell.
Well, all right, but I would really like to go home for a bit. And soon, may I? Hello? Seems like you can't hear me.
Sixth story. Granny Mouse, George the Stag, and a mysterious place deep in the forest. It was early in the morning, and most of Mousewood's animals were still asleep. So if anyone had tried to gently wake them, telling them the sun was up and the birds were singing their morning songs, all they would probably have done was roll over, mumble, and sigh incomprehensibly, just like humans when they want to keep on dreaming. Some animals, though, were already awake, either because they enjoyed the silence when the forest itself still seemed asleep, or because they just couldn't sleep any longer. The latter applied to George the Stag. He'd struggled for days now to get a good night's rest. He always woke up early and couldn't get back to sleep afterwards. Sometimes he was so tired that he didn't even know if he was truly awake or still sleeping and dreaming. So George roamed the deep forest of Mousewood, where even animals who lived there could get lost on occasion. If someone had seen him, they wouldn't have got the impression he was tired at all, since stags have a natural tendency to look regal. If the mice and squirrels ever decided they needed a king, they would surely suggest a stag. A stag's antlers certainly look regal enough. But there was no need for a king. And even if there had been, George would probably just be a prince, since his antlers were still pretty short. The young stag, as drowsy as he was regal, continued his walk through the misty hills of Mousewood. He was in search of a clearing he had discovered a few days back and visited 3 mornings in a row. The strange thing was, the clearing wasn't easy to find. Every morning, it seemed to George, it was in a different place. The glade was as wide as a field. There was tall grass, and the murmur of a stream could be heard nearby, even though it wasn't visible through the reeds and dense bushes. Right in the middle of the glade, still wreathed in mist, stood a huge gnarled tree, with a thick trunk, grand roots that went for miles deep into the earth, and mighty branches towering high towards the sky. George found this tree different from other trees. He liked trees. In fact, George knew many of them, and this one was different. Probably because it grew in such isolation. This enormous tree didn't seem to have anybody for company. Maybe that was why he liked to be around it. George stood next to the tree and looked around the clearing. He wondered what the tree was thinking. "You're an early bird, aren't you?" a cawing voice asked. Startled and bewildered, George looked around, but he couldn't see anybody. Was it the tree talking to him? The answer flapped down to George from a branch up in the green treetop, landing just above his head on a stumpy branch. a coal-black raven, his feathers shimmering mysteriously more blue than black in the day's first sunlight. The bird fluffed up his feathers and made himself more comfortable. "You've been here a couple of times now, haven't you?" he cawed. George nodded. Sitting on his branch, tilting his head to the left, then to the right, the raven peered at him. His black eyes glinted despite the morning mist. "The likes of you rarely venture here," the raven said, gazing across the glade. "This place isn't easy to find. It's as if it were constantly on the move. Yesterday it seemed to be somewhere different, the same the day before," said George. "But I was probably just too tired to find it." "Quite the contrary. You found it because you were still dreaming a little," the raven said. "In their dreams, everybody knows how to find this place. Whoever sleeps will know the way." "What do you mean?" asked George. "Dreamers visit this place," replied the raven. "And sometimes they come here even though they're awake. Then two may sit here by the tree and look into each other's eyes. Sometimes a poet comes, or a badger with brush and easel to paint the tree. But they rarely recognize this place from their dreams, even though they've been here many times." George half understood what the raven was telling him, but was utterly confused by the other half. Pondering, he pawed the ground with his front hoof. "And who are you?" he asked. "The memory of everyone who leaves here is imprinted. A raven once came here. After he left, I remained as part of the tree's memory. It remembers many things, and its memory runs as deep as its roots, for it was the first tree. Without it, there would be no forest. Even when its time had passed, it remained intertwined with the forest. Now its roots not only grow to every part of the forest, but also reach into the realm of thoughts and dreams. It knows all the forest's secrets." "But why is it remembering you right now?" George asked, looking at the glade again. There was no one else there, just the raven. "Because I visited it once and sat beside it here in the foggy dew, just like you. So I crossed its mind. It's a wonderful morning, isn't it?" asked the raven, eyes glinting. George nodded. The raven soared skywards again and disappeared in the green canopy. What was left of the morning mist glowed faintly on the meadows under the gentle touch of the sun's light. High above, the wind began to sing in the branches, while the trunk softly creaked. George decided to return to the more populated parts of Mousewood. The stag had the urge to talk to someone less enigmatic than the black raven, so he ran through the tall grass back to the forest. After a while he turned back, but the glade had vanished. Where it had been just moments before, the trees now formed dense ranks, and George wondered if the tree would remember him as well. It was still early, but Mrs. Mouse the mouse was already busy. The old lady was preparing breakfast for her grandchildren, who were visiting her. She had already been to the baker's, luckily bakers are early birds as well, and bought some rolls. So the breakfast table was already set when her grandchildren, Lars and Jess, came tumbling down the stairs surprisingly early. They scurried over to the table, still in their pyjamas. Mrs. Mouse would have loved to pinch their cheeks because they looked so adorable. Then she remembered how she had hated having her cheeks pinched when she was a child, so she spared her grandchildren. Instead, she put a big glass of milk for them each on the table and tousled their hair. "Well, you two," she said, "you're up early." Lars raised his glass with both hands and took a long swig of cold, fresh milk. His big brown eyes looked out from behind the glass. After a swig that size, he needed a while and took a deep breath before he could answer. Yes, Lars said excitedly, because we're going to sell lemonade outside. Lemonade? Asked his granny. Do you know how to make lemonade? I can make lemonade, Lars replied, even more excited now. Drinking lemonade is what you're good at, said Jess, who was a bit older than Lars, as he buttered his roll and daubed it with jam. But you don't know how to make it. I do, with lemons, said Lars. After breakfast, Granny Mouse made a jug of her tasty lemonade and gave it to Lars and Jess to sell in glasses to passers-by. They'd been inspired by their good friend Humbert. Even though he was a bit of a know-all, they still had a good time with him. Lars carried a small empty box from Granny's garden to the forest track, while Jess followed with a bigger one. Side by side on chairs, the boxes made an excellent booth for selling lemonade. All that was missing was a sign telling potential customers what was for sale and how much it cost. How much is a glass of lemonade anyway? Lars asked. It's not so much what we charge, but how much a thirsty customer is willing to pay, Jess replied like a true salesman, pacing up and down. You mean they just give us as much as they like? Lars asked, scratching his left ear. That wasn't what Jess meant, but he liked the idea anyway. If we're that generous and let people just pay as much as they want, they may give us lots of money, he said, telling Lars what to write on the sign. Lars was good at writing, even though he hadn't started school yet. Tasty lemonade. Price, customer's choice, is what the mice wrote on the sign, and then they waited for their first customer. From time to time, someone passed their booth with a friendly greeting, but no one wanted a glass of lemonade. Then Oswald the squirrel came along and was intrigued by the sign. Just think about what you'd be willing to pay for a glass, Jess suggested. Oswald thought about it. After a while, he asked, So I determine the cost? Yep, said Jess, already worried this would be too challenging and their first customer wouldn't enjoy thinking about the price of lemonade. Oswald ran off and climbed a tree some distance away. He briefly disappeared from sight, then reappeared on one of the trees nearby. He had a big, shiny acorn with him. This one's perfect, Oswald said, polishing the acorn with the back of his paw so it shone even more. The young mice accepted Oswald's payment and poured him a glass of lemonade. He drank slowly, sip by sip. Tasty, he said, returned the glass and took his leave. Lars and Jess put the shiny acorn on the counter and waited for more customers. Suddenly there was a suspicious rustling in the bushes, but the mice were concentrating on the path in front of them. Psst, the bush behind them said. Did you say something? Jess asked, but Lars shook his head. Psst, psst, the bush said, now louder. The brothers turned around, and a stag poked his head out of the shrubbery and grinned at them. George, Lars said happily. Hey, you two, what are you up to? George asked. We're trying to sell marmalade, Lars answered. Lemonade, not marmalade, Jess corrected his younger brother. Lemonade, Lars amended. Look, we got a nice shiny acorn for one glass. George took a closer look at the acorn. It was so shiny he could see his own reflection in it. But it's really not as valuable as a glass of tasty lemonade, Lars said. A little later on, Soft Steel the wood dwarf came by the booth, making no effort to wish the kids a good day. He was about to walk by without a word. Excuse me, George called after him. What is it? The wood dwarf asked, turning round. Do you like lemonade? The stag inquired. I certainly do, replied the dwarf, sceptically peering at the mice and the stag. And now I suppose you want me to pay. But you choose how much, Jess clarified. Pah! On top of all that, I have to choose, the dwarf groaned, pulling a face and pretending to be bored. Maybe you'd like to carve something, George asked. He knew that dwarves were fine craftsmen who probably put all their sensitivity into their craft, and hadn't much left over for other occasions. "You want something carved?" the dwarf asked the mice. Lars handed Soft Steel the shiny acorn, and the dwarf eyed the material. Then he pulled the knife from his belt pouch and asked, "And what should I carve for you?" Lars looked around. His eye fell on George, standing next to him, looking very regal. Lars whispered something to Jess that his brother seemed to think was a good idea. "Carve us a George," Jess said. "All right. Well, get yourself into a proper pose," the dwarf demanded. So George took up an even more regal pose, and Soft Steel began to carve. From time to time he looked up at George and then continued carving. Eventually he blew the shavings from the acorn's surface, took a critical look at his work, and then showed it to the mice. The dwarf had captured a good likeness of George on the shiny acorn. A fine work. Jess took the acorn and thanked the dwarf respectfully. "My lemonade," Soft Steel said, pointing at the empty glass on the counter. He made no effort to make this sound like a request. The children poured him some lemonade, the dwarf gulped the glass down in one go and left. When he was sure that he was out of sight and earshot, however, Soft Steel smacked his lips loudly, since the lemonade had been truly delicious. "Now we have a really valuable acorn," Lars cheered. Mrs. Mouse came out of her house to look for her grandchildren and was happy to see George with them. The kids showed her their new carving, and she immediately recognized George's image. Since he had had such a good idea, the stag was given the rest of the lemonade. Jess took the jug and poured it directly into his mouth, as stags rarely have their hands free. "Another satisfied customer," George commented, licking his lips. "And as a customer, I choose what I pay. So, why don't we go lantern rambling tonight? What do you think, Mrs. Mouse?" "Oh, I haven't done that for a long time," the old lady said, wondering if this wasn't a touch too adventurous. Then she said, "As long as we take it slowly. My legs aren't what they used to be." "Yay!" Jess shouted. "Hooray!" said Lars. George promised to pick the mice up at twilight. Lantern rambling is an old tradition in Mousewood. When the days get shorter, the forest dwellers light colourful paper lanterns with their children and go for an evening walk. After sunset, Lars and Jess put on warm coats and waited outside. Mrs. Mouse joined them and gave her grandchildren sticks to hang their lanterns on. The little ones could hardly wait for George to take them and their granny for a walk through the forest. Mrs. Mouse picked up the lanterns and unfolded them. Then she put candles inside and lit them. Lars got his first. It was shaped like the sun, with a jolly, illuminated face. The flickering candle flame made the sun's smile curiously vivid. Then Granny Mouse hung Jess's lantern on its stick, a radiant crescent moon gazing dreamily into the night. The children held their lanterns carefully so the candles would burn brightly and steadily. "Okay, take good care of your lanterns," Mrs. Mouse said. "You can wait outside for George, but stay near the house." "Yes, Granny," Jess said. Mrs. Mouse returned to the kitchen to prepare dinner, since everybody was sure to be hungry after their walk. Outside, Lars and Jess waited with their lanterns for their friend. "George is certainly taking his time," said Lars, cautiously dangling his lantern. "Yeah, I hope he's all right," Jess replied. "Do you know where he lives?" Lars asked with a worried look. "Somewhere over there, I think," his brother said, pointing down the forest path which disappeared into the dusk. "We could go and meet him halfway." "But Granny said we should wait here," said Lars. "We'll go and meet him and come back to pick up Granny," Jess said. His little brother found that quite reasonable. So the two mice walked slowly down the track with their lanterns, till all one could see was a jolly sun and a dreamy moon dancing faintly in the trees. Shortly after, George the stag arrived at Mrs. Mouse's house and knocked at the door. The grandmother greeted him warmly. "Good evening. Are you all ready?" she asked him, and took her warm coat from the hook by the door. "I'm ready," George replied. "Where are Lars and Jess?" asked Mrs. Mouse, buttoning her coat. She felt a little uneasy. "Why, they're not outside, if that's what you mean," George said, now sharing her unease. Mrs. Mouse ran outside and looked around. There was no sign of her grandchildren. "Where are they? They were out here a minute ago," she said, her voice shaking. The old lady desperately looked about for the children. George's stomach ached at the thought that Lars and Jess were out there in the dark on their own. "Come on, we've got to find them," George said, and knelt down to let Mrs. Mouse climb on his back. Granny Mouse wrapped her scarf around her neck and didn't hesitate for a second before climbing on the stag's back. "Hold on tight," George said. Then he got up and moved off into the darkness in search of the children. "Lars!" George shouted through the nocturnal forest. "Jess!" Mrs. Mouse shouted. But there was no answer to be heard, nor lantern to be seen. "Where are you?" their grandmother called as loud as she could. They came across some other animals, like Conrad the owl and a couple of polecats, but none of them had seen the kids. And so the stag ran through the woods with the grandmother mouse on his back, shouting their names in the dark. Fallen leaves whirled into the air behind them as the stag dashed through the dusky trees. Soon they'd covered a great deal of the neighbourhood, so the stag went into the deeper, less populated parts of the forest. But still there was no trace of the two mice. "Should we search somewhere else?" George asked, worried, scanning the shadows. "I don't know," Mrs. Mouse said in a low voice. Then something occurred to her. "Wait, I've just remembered where I used to sit with my husband," she said hopefully. "Where's that?" the stag asked. Mrs. Mouse tried to remember, and the stag wondered how the old lady planned to find the way in the dark. "Just go straight on," she said, as if she could see the place in front of her. So George went straight on. Suddenly they emerged from the trees in a glade, the same glade where George had talked to the raven that morning. The huge tree towered on the other side of the clearing, bathed in pale moonlight. George ran over to the tree. "This is where I used to sit with my husband, right under that tree when we were young. It's so long since I've been here." "George, can you see the little ones?" asked Mrs. Mouse with hope in her voice. "My eyesight isn't what it used to be. Is there someone there?" George peered over at the tree, and down at the bottom of the trunk there was indeed somebody. He struggled to see who it was. Then he made out two figures, but not Jess and Lars. George didn't know if he could trust his eyes. Down in the shadows sat a young girl mouse and her boyfriend. They were holding hands and smiled shyly at him. The young mouse reminded him of the grandmother on his back. Next to the couple stood a stag, but George could only see his silhouette in the shadows cast by the silvery moonlight. Curiously, it felt like looking into a mirror. "The tree remembers us," he thought, reminded of the raven's words. "It's not the kids," he said quietly to the grandmother. "Then let's ask these nice people if they've seen my grandchildren," said Mrs. Mouse, wondering why George was so quiet. "Have you seen two children?" George asked aloud. The mice pointed to the right into the forest. The other stag paced around in the tree's shade, calling to someone up in the treetop. George couldn't hear what he said as he was too far away. A big bird descended from the high branches, flapping towards George and Mrs. Mouse. In the moonlight, George recognized the raven he had met that morning. "Follow me, will you?" called the raven, soaring over their heads in the direction the mice had pointed. Mrs. Mouse held on tight, and George trotted across the meadow to the glade's edge. The black raven flew between the trees, his silhouette merging with the forest's darkness. George followed him. When they were back in the woods, the raven disappeared. Instead, they saw a smiling sun and a sleepy moon floating between the trees, as if waiting for something. "Children!" Mrs. Mouse called from the stag's back. "Granny!" The children shouted, running towards them, but carefully so their lanterns wouldn't go out. "You were supposed to stay at the house," their grandmother said, with a mixture of anger and relief. The kids looked sheepish and apologized. "Where were you, anyway?" George asked, slightly out of breath due to all the running and yelling. "We were looking for you," Lars explained. "But it seems you were somewhere completely different." George and Mrs. Mouse and the kids made their way through the dark forest. After a while, they found the track leading to Granny Mouse's home. They didn't talk much on the way, as it had been an exhausting evening for all of them. Around them, the woods were so silent that all that could be heard was the soft rustling of leaves beneath their feet. Just before they reached the house, Lars' lantern went out with a faint fizzle. The jolly sun went dark. Shortly afterwards, Jess's sleepy moon also expired. George was relieved that the candles had lasted so long. Without their light, they wouldn't have been able to find the children so easily in the dark. When they reached the mice's house, George bade them farewell. The house was far too small for a stag, and he was also very tired. After saying goodbye, the mice had dinner and went to bed. When Lars and Jess had brushed their teeth and crawled under their warm blankets, Granny Mouse assured them that she wasn't angry any more. She was just happy to have them back, safe and sound. The children had to promise their grandmother not to run away again. Then she tucked them in and put the lights out. And shortly after, both little mice fell asleep. Their granny waited for a while, listening to Jess mumble in his sleep. He already seemed to be dreaming. The old lady went downstairs, and later, sitting in her armchair, she looked around her. On a cupboard stood pictures of her children and grandchildren. One showed a girl mouse and her husband. Next to them lay the shiny acorn carved with George's image. George was probably at home now, Mrs. Mouse thought, also probably recovering from a tiring evening. She greatly appreciated the stag's help in finding the little ones. And after a while, Mrs. Mouse fell asleep in her armchair. In every forest there is a tree. The first tree in the whole forest. So old it knows almost everything, with roots deep in every corner of the forest, even in the realm of our thoughts and dreams. Seventh story.